I'm going to ring my makeshift bell here. Here we go. That was terrible. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the September 11th, 2020 meeting of the Rotary Club of Brentwood. I am Keely Hall and I am happy to serve as your president this year. I mean, I'd probably be happier to serve as your president next year. This year we'll take 2020 for now. And all that it has been giving us all year. Tom Carr this afternoon has our invocation, and Dick Bowers has our pledge and four-way test. So, Tom, would you take it away, please?
All right, if you'll all pray with me. Oh, Father, give us a humility which realizes its ignorance, admits its mistakes, recognizes its need, welcomes advice, and accepts rebuke. Help us to always praise rather than to criticize, to sympathize rather than to discourage, to build rather than to destroy, and to think of people at their best rather than at their worst. This we ask for thy name's sake. Amen.
Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic that stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now let's do the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair? Third, will it build goodwill, better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all? Back to you, President Keely.
Thank you. And we have several guests today. Jane Covington, are you going to do the honors of introducing some guests?
I will do the honors of introducing some guests. I am happy to have as my guests today, Valerie Yancey, who currently serves as the Assistant Director of Legislation for our governor, Governor Lee. Before that, she served 6 years on UT's government affairs team. Valerie, if we were in person, you'd hear all people shouting all their, go Vols things. Before that, she was Director of Legislation for the Tennessee Department of Children's Services under Governor Haslam. And she served lots of various roles in policy and research at the Tennessee legislature before that. But a cool thing about Valerie is that she was chosen by the first female chairman of the Senate Republican caucus, which was Diane Black, to be her chief policy advisor. So welcome, Valerie. And my other guest today is Leslie Hafner. There you are, Leslie. Leslie is currently Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Omnia Partners, which is a bulk buying company for both the public and private sector based in Franklin. And Leslie was specifically recruited to that position from a senior role in Butler Snow Law Firm's government affairs practice. She also has served under two different governors, Governor Sundquist and, of course, most recently, Governor Haslam. Under Governor Haslam, she was Director of Legislation before she was elevated to be a special advisor to the governor. So I'm happy to have both Leslie and Valerie today. And I have to also say that both of them and our third partner in crime who is not able to join today, we are all members of the Roland Myers fan club. So you'll hear Roland's official introduction about all of his professional credentials here in a bit. But if your company is represented by the Retail Association, you are lucky to have Roland. He's very well respected by members of the legislature on both sides of the aisle. And equally as importantly, Roland and his wife, Margaret, meet Leslie and Valerie's and my standard for good person, which is that they are dog lovers. So we're happy to have Roland speaking to our club today.
Thanks, Jane.
Absolutely. Has Jake joined yet? I don't see him on my screen. Okay, any other guests? Does anybody have a guest hiding under their desk or anywhere that I can't see on this screen? Okay, that's it for our guests and visitors today.
Awesome. Well, thank you to both Valerie and Leslie for joining us, and thank you, Jane, for the additional commercial for our speaker today. That's great. We'll get a little bit more into the introduction of our speaker in a minute or two, but first, let's take some time to recognize those who might be happy today. We'll do our happy bucks. Again, you can submit your happy bucks through PayPal or online, or you can just do an IOU for when we're back together again in person. But we'd love to hear why you might be happy today. So no further ado, tell us why you're happy.
Well, I was going to let somebody else talk for a minute, but I'll chime in on happy bucks too. So some of you who were on when Leslie and Valerie first popped into the meeting, we're happy because our annual girls trip to the beach kicks off tomorrow. This is at least the 10th year that we have gone together. It's the three of us and one other friend. And we invoke the Vegas rule on this trip to the beach. So what happens there stays there. But let's see, the oven may or may not have caught on fire one year. People may or may not have lost or had multiple pairs of shoes stolen before. And somebody on this Zoom call may or may not have been locked on an upper level balcony for a long period of time while the others tried to figure out what the strange noise was. So just saying.
Sounds like we shouldn't travel with you.
Probably not a good idea, I guess.
I'm wondering if wine was involved.
May or may not have been.
For sure.
And Valerie's staying on mute for a reason, I think.
Keely, I was gonna say that I'm happy because after today, Larry Kane is gonna stop nagging us about the golf tournament. It's gonna be happening, no doubt about that. We're gonna have a great event, but this is the last day to get your whole sponsors in. And so, because Larry had to knock off, I figured I'd say that, but I'll be glad not to be getting his gentle emails. It seems like just about twice a day. So there we go.
Yeah, I have some announcement too, real quick. This one is happy and one is not so happy. The not so happy first is Bill McCarthy's on today, but his wife Kay fell about 3 weeks ago, and unfortunately we didn't really know about it until about a week ago. So I just want to make everybody aware she actually broke one of her lumbar vertebrae, and she's been in an awful lot of pain. So if you keep Kay and Bill in your prayers, I'd appreciate it. And second of all, my dad is going to be speaking next week, and he is going to be talking about Pearl Harbor and World War II. So if you had any burning questions that you might want to ask him that you know of ahead of time, feel free to send those to me at my email address. And it's, I'd be appreciated to do that. I know you'll have a lot of questions next week too, but just in case you had any ahead of time, let me know. Thanks, Keely.
Yeah, and thank you, Betsy. And we're really excited to have your dad speaking to us next week. And there will be a Survey Monkey coming out. Jennifer, I want to say it's going to be coming out sometime in the next couple of days or so. I probably on Monday. Be looking for that. If you have a question that you would like to submit, you can either send it to Betsy or you can respond to that Survey Monkey with your question. Okay. And we'll kind of compile that list.
Great.
But I think that will be a really good question and answer time. Any other happy bucks? I'll do a quick, let's call this a thankful buck. So my daughter is out in California experiencing her lovely freshman year in college this year. But she is far enough south and far enough west that she is not in danger, at least not right now, with any of the forest fires. There's not a whole lot of forest in Orange County, California, so I'm thankful for the lack of trees in one sense there. But definitely keep all those folks in California and Oregon in your thoughts and prayers. All right, going once. Happy Bucks going twice. No last minute takers. All right, let's move ahead. Let's see. We are continuing on Zoom for the month of September, so we do have a couple of weeks left on Zoom, and then we are proceeding ahead with our plan to meet in person on October the 2nd. Now, again, I will keep reminding everybody of this for, ever. We will have, even when we're meeting in person again, we will have the Zoom option available, and we encourage anybody who wants to use that Zoom option, particularly, of course, those of you who are in a higher risk category, but just anybody that feels the necessity to be on Zoom for health reasons or just for convenience reasons. We want you to be able to utilize that. So we will be meeting in person again, October 2nd. We may have an attendance cap on that. That's to be determined. And then anyone else who is not able to make it in person for one reason or another can join us by Zoom. So that's October 2nd. But until then, we will be on Zoom only. Also have something coming up on September the 17th, which is next Thursday. Next Thursday at 3 o'clock Central Time, Rotary International is having an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion webinar series. The first of those series is starting next Thursday. If you're interested in that, let me know. It's 3 o'clock Central Time, so many of us will be working at that time. I am probably one of them. I have registered for the meeting, but I'll probably end up having to watch it on a recording later. That recording will be posted as soon as that meeting is over. So if you're interested in joining that meeting live and being able to ask some questions live, let me know. Or if you just like to watch it as it has been recorded after it's over, we can do that as well. Linus has already beat me to the punch on the golf tournament, but I'll say it again because it warrants, emphasis. This is the last day to get your whole sponsorships in. Please do that. We would love to have a great swell here on the last day of whole sponsorships that Larry was not even expecting. You know what'd be cool is if we had all these whole sponsorships show up today and we blame Larry somehow for that. Larry, you've been asking for months and months, but nobody was listening to you. But when Linus asked, we got 30 whole sponsorships on that date. So let's do that. Get your whole sponsorships in today. All right, that is all of my mindless, endless droning on and on and on. Clearly it wasn't all of it. I had to do that line. So now, with no further ado, we will have Mr. Bob Searcy introduce our speaker for today. Bob, take it away, sir.
All right, good afternoon, folks. About 15 years ago, I was serving on the board of the Tennessee Retail Association, and we lost our president and CEO. He was recruited away, and I got asked to serve on the committee, search committee, along with 3 other guys, to find a replacement executive director. We had some pretty high standards. We wanted somebody that had a really good reputation with the legislature, knew how to work with both sides of the aisle. They were men of integrity, and wanted somebody that didn't fit sometimes the probably somewhat erroneous reputation of guys serving in a lobbyist role. When we interviewed Roland Myers, he was just the obvious choice, and he became president and CEO of the Retail Association in 2006. He had served a stint at the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce. He had been a legislative director for a U.S. representative, and he also had been a legislative assistant for a committee in the House of Representatives in Washington. Roland has served in a number of leadership board roles. He's the past president of the Tennessee Society of Association Executives. He's the president-elect of the Lobbyist Association. And he said, besides his favorite job in the world, making $35 a week as a camp counselor when he was a Boy Scout, this has been the best job he's ever had. I too, along with Jane and Valerie and Leslie, am in the Roland Myers fan club. Got to know him some years ago. He is one of our clients. And he's kind of the real deal. What you see is what you get. That's kind of one of the reasons that Governor Bill Lee picked him back a few months ago to be on the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Group and chairman of everybody that's in the retail world. He represents them as their chair. So, Roland, I appreciate you taking time to speak to us. He spoke to Rotary a few years ago, and there's so many things he can cover, and he is also going to try to save a little time at the end for questions. Welcome, Roland.
Thank you, Bob. Bob and Valerie and Leslie and Jane, y'all all obviously been talking to my mom, saying such nice things about me, but I really appreciate that. And I'm delighted to be here. Bob is of course exactly right. Bob recruited me, interviewed me to join the Retail Association 15 years ago. And it's been a great privilege and honor to lead the Retail Association. And Bob is my family's financial advisor, and he's just a wonderful person, and we're blessed to have him in our lives. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I do feel like I'm in a little bit of the hot seat because with Jane and Leslie and Valerie here, they know a lot more about Tennessee politics and the political landscape than I do. But between the four of us, I think if folks have questions and want to jump into some of those topics, we can towards the end of my talk. And if you would, just kind of bear with me because this is the first time we've all done a lot of Zoom calls lately. I think I've done more Zoom calls in the last 6 months than I've done conference calls in the last 6 years because Zoom is how everybody meets nowadays. But this is the first time I've done a presentation via Zoom. So just keep that in mind if you would. I was going to tell Bob it's good timing when he reached out to me about 3 weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, to say, would you speak to Rotary? Because we've all been at home a lot, and I had just about come to the end of Netflix, so I was ready to start preparing for something else. Because yeah. So with that said, so what I want to talk about today is obviously everybody's more familiar than they want to be about COVID. But what I want to talk about is the intersection between state government, and I emphasize state government because not federal government. I don't want to talk about what's going on in DC. I'm not as familiar with that, but I'd like to talk about what the state government is doing, how they're working with business, like business owners and business operators, members of the Rotary Club, to address COVID, to try to mitigate its effects. There's several places where we've intersected over the last 6 months, almost all positive and beneficial to Tennesseans, and I just want to talk through that a little bit. So a little over 6 months ago, and we have been living with it ever since. Of course, we are in what we all think of as a new normal. We've heard that phrase over and over again, but I think the reality is we are in a new place. We are very different from where we were 6 months ago. And I think a lot of the changes that we are all living under right now are going to be permanent. And I'll talk more about those later. But where we start to intersect as business representatives with government to address COVID, let me say the Tennessee Retail Association, we are like other associations you're probably familiar with and some of you are members of. It's association like Tennessee Medical Association that represents doctors, Tennessee Pharmacists Association. We represent primarily large big box national chain retailers before the state government. And I have some other clients as well. But my primary role is to be a lobbyist. And what that means is that when the legislature is in session, the state legislature, which is roughly early January through late April, early May, that 5-month time period, when they're in session, I'm up there. Leslie and Jane and Valerie, we are all up there, either in body or in spirit, day to day as the legislature works through its calendar of issues. The rest of the year, we work on other not only legislative issues, because there's always cleanup before and after a session ends, and then you have to prepare for the next session. But you also have to deal with regulatory agencies and other government issues that affect your members and clients. So for me, 2020 at the Retail Association started as a very typical year. I was dealing with bills regarding business taxes, pharmacy regulations, alcohol sales, wages, shoplifting, any bills that affect the employer-employee relationship are bills that we're interested in. So January, February, early March, everything was business as usual. We were just going right along, anticipating a early May adjournment, when all of a sudden COVID hit. And then everything really came to a screeching halt with the legislature. They wound up recessing and then have come back now twice since then, once in early summer to address the budget, the expected budget changes, because we knew our revenue numbers would drop considerably. Sales tax revenue, of course, dropped when the shutdown occurred. And then they've come back again in a special session to address a few issues directly related to COVID, and I'll touch on those in a minute. So March, COVID arrives, the economy shuts down, and of course that is, along with all the other impacts, the economic impact immediately shuttered businesses and eliminated people from the workforce. Businesses began laying off workers, firing workers, and not knowing for a period of time if they were going to be able to, when they were going to reopen, if ever. The retail industry, many of our members, there are about 80,000 retail establishments in Tennessee that 6 months ago were employing 800,000 Tennesseans or so. We don't know exactly what those numbers are today, but we know there are obviously fewer businesses and fewer employees. But that shutdown was, of course, dire for so many of those businesses, but a number of them, particularly the large chains, were able to stay open with some changes, of course. Those changes went into place, and you're all familiar with what some of those things are: the transparent shields, the masks, of course, the social distancing, hand sanitation stations, and so forth. But those businesses stayed open because they deliver essential items to Tennesseans. And I use the word essential because the government, in this case, the federal government and the state government, deemed those businesses to be essential and therefore could stay open. My members and retailers and other businesses, of course, sell things like fuel, household goods, food, medicine, all the basic necessities. So we, as a retail industry, a large segment of that industry never closed. Now, unfortunately, a lot of small retailers, particularly those that just carried a single product item, for example, furniture stores, had to close for a period of time, and they're still struggling to get back on their feet. But having represented business for 25 years now, what happened next, what happened in early April started to come together is the clearest example that I've ever seen of how business and the state can work together to benefit, in this case, Tennesseans. The first intersection really was that time that we were named as essential. So we were told, you can stay open. You are going to have some new guidelines that you need to follow, but we do want you to stay open, and we want you to keep as many of your employees there as possible, and at the same time take some steps to protect customers. One of the things that the state allowed us to do is the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, TEMA, reached out to a number of the industries, retail, grocery, pharmacy, fuel, restaurants, hotels, and asked us to advise them on supply chain issues and help with feeding and housing issues. One of the areas where we were able to be helpful to not only the state government, but local governments is you had some people who were displaced from homeless shelters that had to close. You had a lot of school kids that their primary meal of the day is either breakfast or lunch at school, and schools ended early. So restaurants and retailers and the business community really came together at the urging and the direction of the government to help try to help some of those people and try to mitigate the immediate effects of the shutdown. So the Lee administration, Governor Bill Lee, worked with and his team worked with the business community to put together, as Bob mentioned, what we refer to as the ERG, the Economic Recovery Group. This happened in April. By then, we had a couple of weeks under our belts, and we knew that the economy was going to take a huge hit, both short-term and long-term. People were losing their jobs, businesses were closing. But we also knew that the businesses that stayed open, we needed to figure out ways for those businesses to continue to be open safely to protect not only their employees, but also their customers. So the Economic Recovery Group is a public-private partnership between the state government, the Lee administration, and the business community to try to keep people safe, keep the economy going, try to keep people's jobs in place, and basically just try to work our way through the COVID crisis. The ERG is led by Tourism Development Commissioner Mark Ezell. Some of you may know Mark. He was formerly with Purity Dairy and then later with Dean Foods. And he and his team are doing a great job. As a matter of fact, his chief of staff for the Economic Recovery Group is a man named Sammy Arnold, who Leslie hired back in the day to work in the administration. So he's also a great guy. So COVID hit. We were trying to get our arms around what's going to happen the next few weeks. The business community came together, lots of conference calls, lots of Zoom meetings. We got together with the Lee administration, the state government reached out, put our heads together, came up with the Economic Recovery Group. And one of the first things we decided we needed to do, and every other state was doing this at the time, but one of the things we decided we needed to do was come up with a set of guidelines, not mandates, but guidelines that different industries could operate under safely. We wanted to come up with what are some concrete things you can do in your business to protect your customers and give them a real sense of safety, that they can come to your store and be safe, your place of business, and also your employees. And at the same time, keep your business up and running. So the first task of the Economic Recovery Group was to come up with a set of guidelines. And those were for higher education, restaurants, retail, gymnasiums. And we were trying to find the balance between keeping people safe and keeping the business open. So together we assembled really folks from the various industry groups, people who were experts, folks like yourself who were business owners, operators, who know how that particular business works, and ask them to sit down and work through lots of drafts of documents and have a lot of Zoom calls and take time away from their business to come up with these guidelines. And these were, particularly for the businesses that never closed, developed, I would say, on the fly. These were changing every day. There were practices that were suggested that turned out they sounded good on paper, made sense, but didn't really work in the stores, or they might have been good one week and a couple weeks later they were outdated. So it was then and still very much is a work in progress. But when you go into a place of business or a store today and you see signs up about wearing a mask, or you see signs on the floor about this is a one-way aisle, or we need you to stay 6 feet apart. You've seen the transparent screens up in front of the folks at the cash register and folks who interact with the public. That all came from not only recommendations from the federal government, the CDC, but a lot of that came from folks just like y'all who said, this is how my business operates. This is how the customers act in the store. This is the way that they interact with this business. my employees, this is how they do their job. So here are some practices we think would be helpful to keep business up and running. So those guidelines went through a period of a couple of weeks of work. And I should say, Bob mentioned that we had a retail committee. There was a retail committee. There was one for hospitality and so forth. Just to give you an example of the retail committee, we had businesses large and small from east to west Tennessee. We had everything from a small furniture store in Gallatin all the way up to Walmart and everybody in between. So because it's not a one size fits all, which is part of the reason that the administration has used a guideline approach instead of a rule or you must do this approach. So those practices turned into the guidelines, which were later turned into the Tennessee Pledge program. In fact, here's a copy of, and you can see, I'll just flip through this, but you can see that these are the guidelines: manufacturing, lodging, close business contact, and so forth. This is the work product, restaurant. This is the work product of folks just like y'all who came together in April and May and said, we've got to get something down on paper that we can get out to businesses so they can operate safely. And these guidelines are working. We know that because businesses are taking the Tennessee Pledge, they're promoting this program in their place of businesses, they're implementing these practices, people are safer and healthier as a result, and the transmission of COVID is down as a result. Not just in Tennessee, but other states that are doing something similar to this, they're seeing a lot of success with it. So they're working. Another interaction we have had when it comes to the guidelines is, and I know everybody here is familiar with this, is you've got the state government, of course, but you also have your local governments, city and county officials. And in the cases of emergencies, like a health emergency, the local officials have expanded authority. And in some cities and localities, counties, they have enacted mandates. So they've taken the guidelines and turned them into orders. We have worked with those cities and counties to work through those as best we can. The majority of those, I would say, we agree with, and in many cases we're already doing. Some we have concerns about, namely, and this is an example of an intersection where we have not necessarily aren't in lockstep, but is the enforcement piece. We were told early on by some local governments that, take for example a small retail grocery store, you have to enforce the mask mandate on your customers. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like asking, in many cases, a young clerk to tell an older adult that they can't come in the store if they're not wearing a mask. There's medical conditions that we don't like to ask about that may prevent them from wearing a mask. They may come in the store with a mask and then take it off. Do we kick them out? Do we call the police? How do we work through that? The good news is that while there have been some negative, in fact, violent interactions between businesses and customers, we haven't seen much of that in Tennessee. And I'd say for the most part, the vast majority of Tennesseans are in agreement that these are, if you want to enter this place of business, the store, you need to follow the rules or the guidelines of that particular store or that particular community. Most recently, I mentioned the legislature had been in session and then left early and came back twice. They were initially in session for the regular session, then COVID hit. Then they came back to primarily address the budget numbers and trim away some of the spending that they had planned because of negative revenue numbers. They came back again in special session to address a couple of COVID-related items, and one of those was what we call the COVID liability protection bill. We were concerned as a business community that people might take advantage of the fact that we're operating under these multi-level federal, state, and local guidelines and sometimes rules and mandates, and file lawsuits to say, hey, I came in your store and I got sick and now I'm suing you. Or maybe I'll sue you, maybe I won't, but I want a quick settlement, that sort of thing. We as the business community asked the legislature to consider legislation and the governor's office to consider legislation to protect us in the case of frivolous lawsuits, but not to protect bad actors, not to protect those businesses that are grossly negligent, that are not doing anything to prevent the spread of COVID, doing nothing to prevent customers and employees from transmitting it or contracting it. I'm happy to say that's I think a very small minority of businesses are not doing what they need to do, but for the vast majority, we wanted to be protected, and thanks in large part to the governor and to the legislature, we were able to get that bill done, and now that protection is in place for businesses. So Tennessee is I believe the 10th state to do that. And I would say too is the state has also provided a lot of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in relief, as the federal government has, but the state has in particular to businesses and families. So that's being done to not only benefit the economy, but to benefit individuals as well. So that's a very broad sort of overview of how government and the state government and the business community can work together. So the question now is, where are we today? 6+ months in. A friend recently asked me if we had turned the corner on COVID. And I'm beginning to just sort of anecdotally pick up that there is the sense that we have. The answer is yes and no. We have not turned the corner in terms of the numbers. The worst day we've had in Tennessee in terms of COVID deaths was last month. We had, I believe it was 61 deaths in one day. Our second worst day was yesterday. 57, I think. So the overall trend line, which of course started like this and went high, dipped down again, has dipped up again, and is now slowly starting to decrease. Slowly. We are generally trending in the right direction, but there are still about 1,500 new cases every day. And we still have close to 2,000 deaths since March in Tennessee. And of course, yesterday was our second worst day in terms of death toll. So it is still absolutely deadly, and all the steps that we are all taking right now, we need to continue to take for the foreseeable future. Where we have turned the corner, I think, though, is on government's response and the business community's response to manage it, to address it. We have all these guidelines in place. We have taken these steps to do the best we can to mitigate it. The ERG, they continue to meet. We continue to update the guidelines. You will see some of those guidelines change in the next few weeks to month or so as they get updated. As I mentioned, some solutions, they seem really practical and sensible. It turns out they don't really work. And there are others that made a lot of sense in the beginning that don't necessarily make sense right now. So that will continue to evolve. But those guidelines that we're all living under, masks and washing your hands and 6 feet apart and all that, that will stay in place until, I believe, until there's a widespread effective vaccine. And we don't know when that will be. Hopefully by the end of the year, but it may be the first of next year. And I think some of the practices that you see that have gone into place, like the deep cleaning, the extra cleaning that businesses do when the customers aren't there. Sometimes we are there, but a lot of that happens when customers aren't there. The remote meetings like we're doing and remote working by Zoom and working remotely, working from home. I think there will be a lot of that will stay in place. You'll see a lot more emphasis on employee personal hygiene and training in that regard. I think all of those things will stay into place. Eventually, the masks and the social distancing will go away. We can go back to shaking hands, but we're not there yet. But we will get there. COVID has created terrible loss and suffering on the world. And there's been a lot of damage to businesses. There are a lot of businesses that will never come back. But there are some lessons. And I think for me, the primary lesson is that business and the government, while we are often adversarial, we really need each other. And we do have a symbiotic relationship. We need each other. And in cases like COVID, like a crisis, we can really come together and work together in a way that benefits the people we represent. So I think on the whole, we are stronger, the government and the overall business community, for having gone through COVID. And I think we'll continue to work together, get through the next 6 months, as long as it takes, until COVID is a distant memory. When we first set up the ERG and I was first invited to participate, we all agreed that we look forward to the day that the ERG could be dissolved, and we could throw this in the trash, and it would just be a bad memory. So, and I think we're closer to that day today, certainly, than we were 6 months ago. So let me stop right there and say, again, thank you for having me, and I can be happy to take any questions that y'all have on COVID. Certainly, I can talk about, and I would ask Jane and Valerie and Leslie to weigh in, but Tennessee politics, Tennessee elections, lobbying, happy to talk about that. And also, just a question for anyone here is, if there's anything that is top of mind for you that you think the government can do, the state government can do to help, certainly, I'd love to hear that, and can pass that on up the chain as I work as a member of the Economic Recovery Group.
Thank you, Roland, for coming to speak with us.
No, my pleasure.
Such an easy, simple topic that has no controversy on either side, one way or the other. We'd be happy to have you back sometime when you want to, dig into a topic that has some controversy.
Sure, right. Yeah, no, glad to.
On that note, we do have a couple of questions that have been submitted. The first one is from Hunter, and he asked why, again, non-controversial, why was the governor so reluctant to enforce the wearing of masks throughout the state?
Well, so I would speak just as a private citizen, not a representative of the administration, and obviously that'd be for a direct answer, that would need to come from the governor's office. But I would say my sense is that the governor, as I said earlier, every business has a different approach to how they keep their customers and their employees safe, and I think the governor sees that issue as best handled at the local level. At the smaller unit of government is better and knows more what that community needs. So while certainly mandating is one way to go, I think guidelines gives local governments and businesses a lot more flexibility. If it's a rule, you have to abide by this rule and stay in this box. Having a guideline, you have a little flexibility there. But I would say the governor's been a major champion, as his cabinet and team, of wearing masks and promoting masks, and masks certainly work. So I think he just wanted to give folks the flexibility to do it in their communities.
If I could add to that, Roland, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that also, in the beginning of this thing, there were certain counties that had like 1 or 2 cases, while other counties had tons of cases. And so the governor used his executive order power to empower local governments to make that decision based on the unique situation in their area.
Exactly. I think that's
Is that right, Val?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And that gives those local communities and local businesses the flexibility. And I would say, again, from what I can tell in talking to my members, and as I talk to my colleagues who represent other members, is the vast majority of customers are wearing masks. We can, for the most part, make our employees wear masks, so we do that. But the vast majority of customers are wearing masks, and people come into the place of business because everything tells us that that's a very effective way to help mitigate the spread of COVID.
Great answer. If there's 1 or 2 things that we as state of Tennessee citizens or business owners or Rotarians could do better, if there's one thing that we could do that maybe even is making you a little nervous, what change would you like to see us make?
That's a great question, and I certainly others can weigh in. I think as I mentioned before, I think there is somewhat of a little sense out there that I'm picking up that we've turned the corner and we're through the worst of it, and we can kind of ease up on the gas a little bit. The numbers just don't bear that out, particularly when you consider that school is going back into session, sporting events are picking up, the cold and flu season will be with us soon, and because it will be cold weather, people will be indoors more than they are now. And of course, we know that it's obviously better to be outside if you're gathering in bigger numbers than inside. So I don't know that I'm not a scientist, but and not a doctor, but certainly there is a concern that there will be a second wave, and then it will get worse before it gets better. But I think because we are through the first 6 months of it, everybody's ready to kind of move on and be done with it. There's talk about a vaccine coming and so forth. There's a little bit of a sense of, I think we're through the worst of it. That's just not the case. So if I would make an ask of anybody, if I had a microphone and could talk to the 6 million citizens of Tennessee at once, I would say, as the governor said, don't let your foot off the gas. We're not out of the woods yet. The numbers don't bear that out. So continue all the safe practices that you're doing, socially distancing and washing your hands and wearing your mask, and just be smart about it. So we're not there yet, but I promise you we will get through this.
I think one other thing that we've noticed, and Roland, I think you can speak to this really well, is the small businesses really need to be supported, because I'm sure everybody on this call has personal experience with some of our small businesses going under. And sometimes, especially in the world of big box stores where it's so much more convenient, we really need to be shifting our focus on supporting some of our own local homegrown businesses right now. Jane likes out, like, she and I do our part, I can tell you, in the businesses, but our small businesses really, really need more support than ever. So that's a different direction completely from the healthcare portion, but it's really important right now.
It is, and that's another great ask, is to the extent that you can support your local businesses, the hometown Main Street businesses. That's really crucial, because many of them didn't have the resources and the employee base and the footprint to stay open like a lot of the big box stores did, but they play obviously an extremely valuable role. So we absolutely need them. So to the extent that you can patronize them, please do that. I still need everybody to go shop at the big box stores too. So if you could divide it up a little bit, I would appreciate it.
And I'm getting a few questions that are submitted to me privately, so I'm going to read through those two.
Sure.
Two are related. What's the biggest issue faced by Tennessee, not COVID related? And if you could advise Governor Lee on any issue, not just COVID, what advice would you give?
Gosh, that's a great question. What's the biggest issue facing Tennessee? You know, I've got a pretty narrow world that I live in as far as representing retailers. Tennessee is a wonderful place to do business. Every year, the governor and the legislature for all the years, the 20 years that I've represented retail in the state chamber, have really worked hard to keep Tennessee a good place to do business, and we consistently are in the top 10 states to do business. But I know certainly there are a lot of issues around education and agriculture and healthcare and so forth that are critically important. But I can at least speak to the retail industry and say that while there's been a lot of national level changes in the retail industry in the way people shop, we think Tennessee is a great place to do business. It's why you see so many. It seems like every week there is an announcement of another corporate headquarters moving to Tennessee, and that reflects the past gubernatorial administrations and the legislature's work to keep us a great place to do business. And the COVID liability bill that I mentioned earlier, that's a good example of it, because with that bill, you have not only the change in the law that will protect and benefit businesses and trickle down to their employees and their families and so forth, but that sends a signal to other states and to companies that might want to move into Tennessee, that Tennessee is business friendly, and we are welcoming, and we will listen and work with the business community.
Couple more that are kind of related.
Sure.
How do you see impacting commercial retail businesses more going forward? He says, obviously there was a trend pre-COVID to move to more online shopping versus brick and mortar. And then a related question toward that, to that is, do you foresee the demise of malls as we know them today?
So the retail industry is certainly struggling with both those questions and has been for a while. In terms of the malls, I think my sense is that they are adapting to the changing environment. Certainly COVID has had a terrible effect on malls. They are very, they're hurting these days. They need customers. So when something like COVID hits, it's just been devastating for them, and it exacerbated the trend that we've seen for people to stay at home and do their shopping. So back to the first question. So I think my sense is malls aren't going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think we'll have as many malls as we do today. I think the number of malls will decrease, but I still think you'll have, I think a city like the size of Nashville, for example, or Memphis, my hometown, I think you'll still always be able to have a couple of malls with a couple of big anchor stores and some of the key specialty stores. A place like Opry Mills, I think there'll always be a place for that. But I do think the smaller communities being able to have a mall and sustain it, that may not bear out. People are doing a lot more online shopping than they used to. Certainly COVID has encouraged, and we have encouraged people to do that. I would say the traditional brick and mortar retailers that you think of, not Amazon necessarily, or Wayfair, Newegg, some of the key online only companies, but some of the main big box retailers and some of the small retailers have seen and grown their internet presence and e-commerce presence over the last couple of years, because that's the way that people are shopping. One interesting trend is we've seen home delivery of goods, particularly food, during COVID go up 30-40% in some cases. So I've had food and groceries delivered in the last few months, whereas before I never did that. So we're seeing a lot of that, which is a good, safe, touchless way to get the goods you need during these times. So yeah, those are all great questions that the industry's been struggling with and will continue to for the next few years.
And I will say, on behalf of my 14 and 16-year-old daughters, they both hope that the demise of malls is way far away.
Good. Well, I need them to make every effort to keep that from happening. So that's great.
The Hall family is doing our part.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Roland, for joining us. We really appreciate it. We have a couple of thank yous on here. Thanks for sharing your level of detail and your expertise. It's great to have people like yourself, people that have your level of experience and your knowledge, your kind of inside knowledge to take time out of your day to speak to folks like us. So
Happy to do it. My pleasure.
Thank you for what you do. We wish you the best in your continued efforts in all of those ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we're finishing up here, just some club business announcements and reminders. I don't want the meeting to be over without acknowledging the date. So many of us remember, like yesterday, where we were on September 11th, 19 years ago, and we don't want to forget. We remember those people who gave their lives, who had on a Thursday night their last dinners with their family. We remember those people who were getting up Friday morning to take a flight to somewhere fun and didn't make it. We remember the heroes on the plane who decided to do something about what they were seeing happening so that more people didn't die than had to. We remember the heroes that rushed into the buildings, that cleared the streets. We remember the heroes that cleaned up after. We remember, and we just want to take some time to do just that today. We also want to honor our local heroes, and we were disappointed that we weren't able to have our picnic like we do every year last night. We do, if you have a chance today to send a note, to make a phone call, to put a yard sign up in your yard, to take some cookies by a fire station, whatever you can do to let our first responders here locally know that we appreciate what they do to protect us every day. And we will have that picnic in the spring. Stay tuned on the date when that will occur. We also want to remember those amongst our number who are hurting, who are healing, who are struggling in whatever form they are. Certainly the McCarthys and Kay and her recovery, the Fiddlers, the Stokes, the Wheelwrights. I see Roger on today. I'm so happy to see you here today. We do remember those in California and Oregon who are evacuating. I think a third of the state of Oregon has had to be evacuated. Is that what I heard? And we think about those businesses, those retail establishments, and those communities that are being affected on the tail end of this COVID pandemic. Well, what we hope is the tail end. Again, not to jump the gun there. So there's just a lot to be mindful of today, and I didn't want the day to go on, the meeting to end without making those reminders. Again, thank you all for being here today. We'll see you next week. We do have a board of directors meeting next week. Oh, Jane. Did I jump in over you, Jane?
No, I was just mouthing just since I screwed that up. It's on Tuesday.
Yes, a board of directors meeting on Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 via Zoom. Again, that same board of directors link as before. So not this Zoom link, the board of directors link. That'll be on Tuesday at 4:30. Any other golf tournament sponsorships, get your whole sponsors in today. Any other announcements before I sign off?
Keely, Sherry and I will be taking cookies to each of the fire departments, and we will have a sheet cake and cookies at City Hall for both the police and fire.
Awesome. Thank you guys for doing that. And again, all of our members, whatever it is that you can think of to do to honor our heroes, our local Brentwood first responders, would love to encourage you to do that today or any day for that matter. All right, if there is no other good for the business, no other business for the good of Rotary, we'll say it that way. How about that? Then I urge you to be safe and stay healthy. And most of all, keep on serving. We are adjourned.